Welcome to today's strategy session brought to you by dot.LA on exploring the health and wellness market. Really excited to have this group of guests that I do today. We're going to be talking about what's sort of broadly defined as anything that promotes health and wellness, and that category encompasses a lot of different things from yoga, meditation to nutrition, personal care, genetic testing, et cetera. It's a really broad market, and our guests are really the experts to talk about it. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and we'll start with Kevin Zhang of Upfront Ventures.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Great to meet you guys. I'm one of the investment partners at Upfront Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital firm. Most of us are here in LA. Been here since '96. We tend to go very early investing in companies, usually that first 2 to 6 million into a company. We get on the board and we continue to invest. Most of my time is spent around healthcare. And that's really all aspects from enterprise facing tools to consumer facing services and products. I was originally meant to be a doctor, was a neurobio undergrad, and starting to make use of that again, as Rachel alluded to earlier, as really sort of the field in health and wellness is becoming ever larger and seeing just a lot more adoption amongst both enterprises and consumers.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And next, Kalina Quibel from, go ahead, Sequoia Consulting.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So I'm Kalina Quibel. Thank you, Rachel and dot.LA, for having me. Super excited to join Kevin and Dr. Jonathan Leary on this. So as mentioned, I'm with Sequoia Consulting Group. So we're a strategic HR benefits and consulting firm headquartered out of the Bay Area, but offices in LA, New York, Arizona, India. So we're pretty all over. We focus on innovative technology companies for the most part, really companies who are investing in their people as it relates to their total benefits and wellness philosophy. So I'm the director of well-being there. I've been there about 5.5 years, really just focusing on creative and innovative strategy around wellness programs and total benefit support, leveraging a lot of things like technology and focusing on the areas of physical health, mental health, financial health, as well as family programs. So in the peak of the pandemic, obviously employee well-being has been a huge topic in the spotlight. And so excited to share a little bit about what we've been doing with our clients, what we've been seeing, and kind of where well-being's headed as well.
Great. Dr. Jonathan Leary, creator of Remedy Place.
Yeah, so I've had my private practice for about 5 years now. It's a non-surgical, non-drug approach to almost anything. I also do retreats all over the world. I do corporate talks and then a little bit of consulting. And then my latest venture is Remedy Place. We created a whole different category in the health and wellness industry, calling it a social wellness club. So it's a whole entire club centered around holistic self-care and one that's made to enhance your health and your social life at the same time.
Fantastic. Well, we'll learn a little bit about that and about all the rest of these things we're talking about. So let's just start off with the wellness industry. I mean, it's really boomed in recent years. Depending on who you ask, they say it's a $4.3, $4.5 trillion industry. Why do you think there's been such an explosion? And is there something too that may be missing from traditional medicine? Maybe I'll go back to you, Kevin. You could start us off.
Yeah, happy to. I think there's just been a lot of structural changes. If we just talk about the US itself in terms of the healthcare system, how people pay for their healthcare, so much of those dollars now rest more and more on the patients in these high deductible plans. And I think that's really put patients more into the driving seat of, hey, what should I really seek out for my health and wellness needs, as opposed to everything gets funneled through insurance, everything gets funneled through doctors and MDs. And I think that's just them being met with, an incredible growth in companies and practitioners as well in all aspects of physical and mental well-being. Obviously, Dr. Leary is an example directly right there, right? And I think that's just been an sort of non-stopping trend for the last 10, 15 years. And we're seeing a lot of that becoming a lot more accessible these days.
Kalina, you want to jump in? You are nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Kevin. And so being, in the insurance industry, but also seeing how that's morphed a lot. I think, if you look 20 years ago, even, 10, 15 years ago, a lot of people really just relied on their primary family medicine to be their guiding light of what their healthcare should look like. And as we always talk about, this industry was more about preventative care and trying not to get sick or fighting illness once it was diagnosed, as opposed to being really proactive about your health. And I think nowadays, with wellness being such a hot topic and a lot of people are discussing it, people have a really specific idea of what they want their health experience to look like. So, it's not just about going to your family doctor and having them tell you what you need. People have an idea of what they want, that they know the diet that they want to have, what they want to eat. They know about their activity. They have a particular insight of, does their doctor practice holistic medicine, traditional? Do they do a mix? What's their background? And so people are really getting and honing in on what they want care to look like. And because of that, they're challenging the traditional healthcare system in the way that what insurance typically covers does not necessarily usually include all those trendy things. And in fact, providers themselves often make more by going out of network or doing direct payment models or memberships or things like that. So at least in the employer realm, it's really changed the way that corporations purchase and think about insurance, because they're looking now toward this more holistic sense of, what do our employees want? What does healthcare mean to them? What are the types of providers and people they want to see? And because of that, it's not always just directly with insurance. They partner with a lot of these innovative companies that, Kevin's company is investing in, or, even, Dr. Jonathan, that you're forming yourself, and trying to look at where should the investment be based on what people want their experience to look like.
I'm interested in talking about those companies, but I kind of want to go back to this idea of and I just stayed on this topic about why it's booming, and is there something missing from traditional medicine? I think about, women, for instance. Women were once told that breastfeeding was bad for them, or that, PMS isn't a real thing. And I think, as people become more, quote unquote, more woke, right? There does sort of tend to be like, hey, there are limits to some of the forms of Western medicine that we sort of, maybe some of us grew up, thinking as that was the Bible, right? And that there wasn't, any deviating from that. So is that in part of it as well? Just sort of a mental paradigm shift?
I think it's just it's the awareness and the education now that's becoming a huge part, and people are for the first time asking questions. And in my eyes, the more things that I see is people want to know how to establish their own health independence. What can I do for myself instead of being dependent on somebody else? And people are realizing that their doctor can't make them healthy; only they can make themselves healthy. And I think with this, at least what I see from the alternative medicine side, years ago, there was no campaigns or billboards or commercials or these huge marketing ads on alternative healthcare, because who's going to fund these huge ads like big pharma funds for drugs? And I think the rise, one thing that I see amazing about the social platforms like Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or now TikTok, what you're able to do is you can put a video on and get millions of viewers, where before you could never have that type of platform to have such viewership. And I really do see the rise of alternative medicine really because of these free networks. And people are hearing people's stories, they're seeing the benefits, people are talking about mental health, talking about things that they were scared to talk about before, or didn't know a friend that experienced it, but now maybe their favorite health or wellness expert on YouTube is talking about it. And they're like, you know what, I want to give that a try.
Mm-hmm. Well, so things that people weren't talking about before, and I think, Kalina, you were saying that mental health has definitely become sort of a larger focus of company health wellness packages. There's also been sort of mandates as well that has enabled that. Headspace, Calm, they're developing sort of corporate focused programs. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how have these traditional wellness packages changed, and we'll just leave it
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's really interesting. I mean, I won't bore you, but I actually did this presentation once on the history of EAPs, like employee assistance programs. And, EAPs were kind of started after the war to help people cope with, these levels of depression and alcoholism that were coming into the workplace. And what's kind of crazy is EAPs very slowly evolved to just being this established solution for a lot of workplaces as the bare bones of a hotline that you could give someone if they were in need. And what started happening as mental health became less of again, treating the sick and treating those that essentially needed a very high level of mental health care, almost at, a rehab level or a treatment facility level. People started saying, hey, I just have general levels of anxiety. I'm going through a relationship issue. I mean, we have a pandemic, like people are just, it's levels of stress none of us have ever comprehended or thought we would ever have to comprehend. And because of that, people are realizing it's not just about, oh, I'm at this breaking point and I need therapy. People just want someone to be able to talk to and understand how to navigate this high, never going down level of stress. They often talk about stress going up and down, and in that way it's manageable. I think we've all just kind of been at this really high level of stress that isn't ever going down. And in fact, even when we sleep, it's not going down. People are struggling with things like that. So a lot of what we've seen is, at first it was making sure you had something in place as an employer, which tended to be your EAP. Then it was digging a level deeper to say, do we have in-network providers that we can point people toward? Then telehealth emerged and we started seeing more virtual therapy appointments and things like that. And now we're kind of at this evolved point of therapy isn't just about having access, it's about, was it easy to get an appointment? Was it the service you wanted? Did you find a therapist or a service that was the type of treatment that you were looking for? Again, people have this idea of what they want that to look like. For some, it's receiving content like through a Headspace or a Calm or resources like that. For others, it's the two-way street of things like that therapy. And then we even get this level deeper right now where diversity is such a big topic. And a lot of the employers we work with are doing these, diversity audits of sort to challenge these therapy networks and groups to say, what is the breakdown of your therapist? How easy is it for one of my employees to find a Black therapist? What type of support do you provide to my LGBTQ employees? And so it's also trying to change systemically what the therapy and mental health system looks like, which traditionally has been, primarily a female white industry, and looking at how do we change that and how do we find resources that help a broader, diverse group of employees and people.
And Kevin, you're shaking your head there. Are there companies you're seeing that are sort of answering those questions that are emerging as solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kalina touched on a number of wonderful points. I think we're still early into this phase where I think much of that conversation has been around access. I mean, frankly, up until a few years ago, mental health providers and the services they provide, they tend to be reimbursed less by insurance. And that's part of the reason why you see so much of sort of in the media and movies and TV that, oh, if you need mental health services, that's only private pay, right? Like you have to pay hundreds of dollars an hour, et cetera. And thankfully we did have regulation shift a few years ago that called the Mental Health Parity Act that basically says, hey, you have to pay for mental health services the same as you would for physical, which sounds crazy, but that was literally the case in this country. And so that's opened up sort of a lot of awareness and possibility for the providers, and then the employers and insurers have started to take that on. But we're still pretty early in that access phase. I mean, it is incredibly challenging to find, your fit of a therapist, whether it's based on religion, race, the health conditions that you have, what you're able to afford, et cetera. And I think that's really step one in a lot of these startups. You look at companies like the Talkspaces of the world. They've really sort of gone from that marketplace model to building out a large provider base of various kinds of therapists across different states, so that you can have more to pick from to start, and then try to categorize them better, so you can try to find a person you think would be a good fit for you. And I think step two then now is actually being able to follow through on that. I think it's one thing to say like, hey, we've now checked the box as a company, right? Like that's accessible now, versus like, actually, did you end up proceeding through and getting the therapist you want? And if it didn't work, were you able to find the next best one, right? And I think that's where, you know, again, a lot more legwork needs to be done. And I think it requires actually these startups to have, or these companies to have even more tighter relationship with the therapist. It's one thing to say, hey, you can be 1099 and provide some services to my employees versus like, hey, look, I actually want to build a, you know, what's, you know, traditionally considered almost like a provider group, right? I want to aggregate a bunch of you together. We know that we have gaps in this, you know, city where our employees are specifically with addiction. So we're going to go find a bunch of addiction specialists and try to contract them directly and give better preferential rates. Like you need that kind of, you know, really digging down a couple layers deeper to really fill out all the needs of your employees, of your patients. Otherwise, again, we will only stay at the surface level. You know, a single step is not enough.
And two, I mean, what you're talking about too is sort of when people need a therapist, when they're at that level. And I think sort of the threshold for that has changed, and people have been sort of a lot more cognizant of the role that stress has played and trying to mitigate stress in their daily life. And that in part sort of fuels so much of the wellness industry. I don't know, Dr. Jonathan Leary, I mean, do you see that even before people seek out maybe therapists, that they're looking for other avenues to bring down their levels of their stress and just sort of cope with daily existence?
I mean, 100%. I mean, like everyone has said before, that stress is at all-time high. And what we're realizing is that you can cut out some stress in life, but there's certain stressors that we really can't cut out. So finding ways to counteract that stress is kind of what Remedy Place, my club, is all about. It's about bringing everything back to that baseline where your heart rate's down, where your mind is clear, whether we're hyperoxygenating the brain in a hyperbaric chamber, putting you through a breathwork meditation. You know, we have so many different modalities that are all stress management. And that's why we're also getting into corporate wellness, because a lot of companies now, they'll pay for most of their employees' gym memberships, but working out isn't the only thing for wellness. And I think people are realizing that it's actually much more than just going to the gym. So with our corporate memberships, it's basically just an appropriate amount of daily self-care or coming in a couple times a week that just really offsets them sitting at a desk all day. Or if they're constantly flying all over the world, what are they doing to counteract that stress? Or, you know, if they're constantly out for these social meetings where they're maybe not eating healthy or having too much to drink, how are we counteracting each one of those stressors? And, you know, my goal with every single member or guest that comes in is no matter how they're feeling when they walk in, I always want them to feel better when they leave. And that's something that we've been able to really accomplish here.
So what are some of the kind of services, and I mean, you obviously have sort of higher end clients, right? So what are some of the services that they're looking for and that they're kind of demanding? And what have you seen in terms of, have you added some, or maybe some things that maybe, you know, everyday people who aren't living in this wellness bubble haven't been exposed to, that you're bringing into your practice?
Yeah, so my practice was a concierge practice prior to Remedy Place opening, but I used the 5 years of the clinical evidence to actually see what worked. So everything at Remedy Place is a gathering in one space and creating an experience around it. But we have everything from hyperbaric chambers, infrared saunas, breathwork ice bath classes, cryotherapy, cupping, acupuncture, massage, chiropractic, lymphatic massages, vitamin IVs, vitamin injections, a whole entire studio that is made for breath work classes, sound bath classes, doctor instructed stretch mobility classes, educational classes. We also do functional medicine, which is a series of different blood work, and then creating these holistic nutrition programs. And then also the other thing that I saw missing so much is the social side. People think being social is only a negative thing to their health. So we wanted to create a whole entire club that cut away all the temptations and toxins and gave you a place where you can enhance your health and your social life together. So it's kind of like what the fitness industry did with group fitness classes. We've done that with healing. Everything here you have the option to do by yourself, but we'd actually rather you do it with others. And that just gives a sense of like human connection, which is also such an important thing in any healing process.
So some of these practices are something, I mean, definitely you would not see in traditional wellness or corporate healthcare packages, but maybe that's changing, Kalina. I mean, companies are using sort of yoga meditation camps. They're looking at things that they may have not done beyond the gym that Dr. Larry was talking about. Can you talk about some of the sort of, forward-looking different, I guess practices isn't the word, but forward-looking services that companies are looking to help provide their employees?
Yeah. And so, going back to what we were talking about when I was talking about the mental health side, is that people have this picture of what they want their health experience to look like. And some of it is they don't know all the ins and outs, but they know that they want to go to, a social gathering of people, or they want it to be online, or they want it to be, through a technology like their Fitbit or Apple Watch or things like that. So they know certain elements and then piece some of it together. I think something that's been really interesting is, when I first started in the corporate wellness space, a lot of it was still going off of, some of you may have heard of like the 80-20 rule, how 80% of your company's dollars are spent on 20% of the sickest people. And so a lot of corporate programs were about that. They were focusing on the sickest of the people and trying to prevent things like smoking and diabetes and those who are overweight, and really just kind of that focus on nutrition. And I think where a lot of employees have challenged their employers in that regard is that employers want it to be good an employee experience for everyone. And especially with the industries we work in, when those employees can be anywhere from 22 years old to, late 30s, like all of that diabetes, cancer is like out of sight, out of mind for them. And they're really focused on just setting up healthy behaviors now. And so a lot of what they're asking their employers for aren't those disease management and traditional like health coaching things. It's more exactly what, Dr. Jonathan Leary just said, is focused on those like more hip type of things, like cool workouts, really focusing on meditation and mindfulness, integrating mental health, thinking about their total family and their
Can you
sleep.
give us some examples of some of those kind of services that you're providing to companies that you might not have been providing a couple of years ago?
Yeah, so things like, in the physical space, I'd say it's a lot more about interesting like gym reimbursements, as opposed to, traditional just like health stipends. We had before where it was a lot of people were giving these, paying for 24-hour fitness or paying for an Equinox. That's changed to more of a general health stipend, so that they can use them for health clubs, or they can use them for online services or personal trainers or things like that. On the mental health side, I think it's a lot of covering different apps and different services to get people those subscription-based models, so that they can go into those and really looking at, mental health beyond just traditional insurance therapy and trying to cover those costs. And then I think it's a lot of trying to look at solutions that are really integrating technology, and also things like genetics and AI and all sorts of just behavior things into them to help actually like guide and predict people's journeys, based on not just what the employee thinks they want, but using their family history, their background, personal data that you can receive from fitness devices and things like that, and really incorporating that into their overall health journey.
So Kevin, what kind of companies are you seeing, and what kind of trends maybe are you seeing in terms of like what people are demanding that fulfill some of the needs that Kalina is talking about?
Yeah, I think frankly with investments, a lot of times, these things come in cycles, and often, what was popular or what was in 10 years ago sort of come back around again. And I think a lot of it is maybe it didn't work last time because of access reasons or accessibility or pricing, et cetera. But what has changed sort of in, consumers' abilities these days to be able to, afford or access these things, or that sort of then in turn make them successful. So I think actually a lot of the things we talk about, whether diet and nutrition is a huge one that, it's not like Weight Watchers and Jenny's hasn't been around for a long time, but even you see a resurgence in those companies, right? And I think part of it is just, it's that much easier for us now to be able to, figure out what the right diet plan is, and then have that shopping cart set up, and then have that getting delivered to you, et cetera. Whereas, those infrastructure layers didn't exist before, and so much of the onus depended on the consumer directly to have to go and do each step themselves. Similarly, then if you look at things like mental health, et cetera, we sort of talked about that quite a bit. But one of the, I think, most interesting aspect is, people have this traditional image of therapy as, you only go if you have problems and issues. Whereas I think what's shifted a lot in the broader consumer awareness is, just like you would go to a gym to train and get fit physically, like why wouldn't you think about, being more proactive with your own mental health, right? Like you don't necessarily have to have a problem to be going to seeking mental health. And so part of that is obviously telling a different message, and part of that is changing up the format. Like, why does therapy always have to be one-to-one with you, sitting on a posh couch, right? Like that image in movies is a bit stale versus I think some of the most interesting sort of new companies and services you see nowadays on mental health is like, hey, we should rebrand mental health and change up the format so that it could be, a group session that, maybe is not even talking about the fact that you have mental health problems, but is specifically addressing, how to deal with, promotions at work, right? Like you can make these topics very functional and specific, and really at the end of it, it's backed by a lot of sort of mental health, training and practices to really understand like what might be holding you back or what is giving you stress with regards to these specific situations. And that just helps, again, open up people's willingness to try these things in different formats such that it's not like I'm going to therapy one-on-one and that means I have a problem. And I think so that's changing up the format, I think, is and innovating on that format is a big shift right now.
Yeah.
How I'm sorry, go ahead, Kalina.
Oh, sorry, Rachel. I was just going to say something that you touched on, Dr. Larry, and Kevin kind of alluded to too, is there's this, allure to how celebrities have always had this unattainable wellness support, as well. We kind of view them as having all resources to nutritionists and workouts and everything. And I think people kind of are drawn to that. And so it's really interesting to watch as well as when you think about going to your doctor, you don't really have a choice or an agenda. You just book a 30-minute, maybe hour appointment, and that's the only choice and selection you get, versus the way a lot of these studios and clinics and memberships like what you put together are doing is they're creating this more spa-like menu of, hey, you can choose what your experience is going to look like when you come in. And I think that's the rebranding a lot of these wellness vendors are also doing, is it's not just book 30 minutes and we'll tell you what we should do during it. You have this array of menu selections that you can choose. Hey, this is what I want my time at the gym to look like, or these are the topics I want to focus on in my mental health session, or these are the financial topics I care about, which kind of creates people to feel like they have a little bit more ownership and access to those before kind of unattainable type of custom services that the average person doesn't get access to.
I love that point, and please feel free to jump in. Thanks so much for that, Kalina. I encourage you to, because I think wellness is really, it's supposed to be for everyone, but really it has been a privilege for so long. And some would say, white privilege. And I wonder how you see that and whether that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me if healthcare access in our country is a problem, it's like, it is a huge problem. And I think that we've seen that more so now than ever before with the disproportionate rates of how people are affected by the pandemic, racial injustice that we're viewing. Like I could go on and on about this for an entire session, but I do think that's really where a lot of these companies, especially the innovative ones, and I'll use Headspace as an example, are really using their power of partnerships, marketing to a better good. So you saw with Headspace, for example, subscription-based model, people have to pay for it, not super pricey, but the average person might not choose to actually pay. They might just do their own self-help. When the pandemic hit, they opened it up to be free for healthcare workers, free for teachers. They made it free for all New Yorkers. So they kind of added this element of social good into the offering as well to try to make things more accessible to people based on the success of their product. And so I think something really interesting that we're seeing both with the employers we work with, and then you also see with these vendors and companies that are receiving venture-backed funding, is they're trying to, come up with business model that goes after corporate and that comes up with a good price that's attainable for most people. But based on their success, they're also trying to give back and do work for those that can't normally obtain those services. And so I do think we'll start to see more and more of that, where even the most exclusive of gyms or different things like that will try to find ways to help subsidize costs for those in need to make it be exclusive, but yet attainable to those that might not ever have access to it in the first place.
Dr. Leary, do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, I'm especially interested in your thoughts because, I mean, you definitely do cater to a high-end crowd?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I really do think that the answer to this is really just education, right? Like I said before, in order to gain your own health independence and not be dependent on a specific service or location or doctor, it's just learning how to take care of yourself. And there's not these fancy shortcuts or fancy surgeries or drugs or equipment that are going to fix all your problems. Foundational health is actually quite simple and it's so overlooked. It's like, if you have a disease or you have this condition, what are you ingesting? Anything that we're putting into our bodies, either fueling or fighting disease. With mental health, it's like stop suppressing emotions, being able to talk and communicate. With pain, which is another huge problem in the world, it's just that the body's not moving properly. So now, I mean, from a movement standpoint, learning how to move the body, mobility, and focusing on these imbalances, there's free workouts, free apps, free lives that are going on every single day. Just talking about mental health and telling people, especially men, don't suppress emotions. You need to talk about everything, all these things build up. Finding people to talk to or little outlets like Headspace or these apps that are low priced makes a huge difference. And same thing with food. You might not be able to afford fancy supplements, but just learning how to eliminate certain things in your diet that are definitely causing huge problems, that is really valuable. I mean, you can't have pain or disease without inflammation. So if you look at like the top inflammatory foods in the world, or in America more so than, I mean, just our diet's a little bit different, but having gluten, dairy, soy, corn, processed meats, fried food, if we can start minimizing this, cutting down the inflammatory markers that we have in our body, symptoms and conditions start to subside. And that's really not expensive to do by just doing some elimination, learning how to move the body, and learning how to express emotions and not hold things. I think people just don't have access to learn how to do so. But my goal of what I hope to accomplish in life is really just create a big enough platform to be a free educational platform to show people how to teach and take care of themselves.
And Kevin, certainly there are, I mean, like Kalina was alluding to, there are a lot more access points now for people to access sort of wellness products, not only mental health and just education services. How do you think technology has changed this marketplace, and how do you think it will sort of going forward?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest roles technology plays at lowest cost. So, if we go back to how do you serve underserved communities, right? Like there are a lot of existing services out there, especially in the local community, sort of what broadly people term social determinants of health, right? That's everything from like having access to healthy foods in the local grocery stores to community clinics and things like that. And I think a lot of that is quote unquote still in the analog world, hard to find out about them, requires phone calls and in-person visits. And some of the roles that technology has played is kind of bring those community resources, one, make it very searchable and easy to find out about, and then two, trying to sort of make some of them accessible through just your phone, right? And sort of through apps and things like that. So I mean, there's been a whole host of companies, whether we're talking about just like a straight up actual medical group, but then that directly partners with all the community clinics, like something like a City Block Health that was originally spun out of Google, to something like I think they're called Unite Us, right? Which is specifically focused on just, hey, we go and service all of these community resources and services and bring them online. And then we package that all up together so that we can actually then, whether it's to an employer or health insurance company, be like, hey, like, why do you guys only think of, MDs as sort of your resource? You should think of these community resources as well. And you should actually subsidize it. Like, you should give patients a stipend, or you should reimburse for them, for using these services. And that obviously then becomes a two-way street, right? Where it helps these community resources become, be able to scale and grow more. And so I think there's a lot of that going on simply in lowering the costs and aggregating a bunch of these already existing services so that's become that much more accessible, but then also hopefully cheaper through subsidization from health insurance and employers.
Yeah, well, I just want to get to that point about insurances. How are insurances sort of harnessing this and going into markets maybe that they weren't going into before? Maybe you can give some examples of where you're seeing this happen.
Yeah, so some of the ones I just talked about, I mean, like it would have been unheard of back in the day for, whatever, United, Cigna, Anthem, your local blues plans, et cetera, to sort of offer you some sort of reimbursement or stipend for any of these kind of community services or wellness services, et cetera. And now they've flipped to really where they think of, I mean, you look at some successes even as simple as like, let's say ClassPass, right? Which is like a very popular subscription, gym membership thing. And then now with COVID and whatnot, you can also access a lot of, on-demand and live video stream classes. I think frankly for the insurers, they were always at the front line of paying for the healthcare, and they're the ones that have millions to tens of millions of patients enrolled into their plan. And now all of a sudden they see that some of these low cost tech solutions can get to the same scale, right? They can also get to millions of consumers and patients and actually sign them up, and that people are willing to pay them $10 a month, $15 a month. And that makes them realize, wait a second, like we're almost losing our role as sort of the gates, right? The steward for like where you should go seek healthcare services. And now they want to, instead of sort of fighting against them, they want to bring that in, right? They want to say, hey, can we subsidize your, ClassPass membership and make it free to you? Can we subsidize a Fitbit tracker so that we can have more data on the patients? Can we subsidize some of these group mental health classes that we used to not consider to be mental health? Like that's not one-on-one therapy, so we don't cover that. So I think a lot of the employers and insurers are now waking up to say like, hey, these are essential services that we should actually pay for.
I want to get back to, and I just want to say for those that are listening, we'll be taking questions in about 10 minutes. So if anyone has any questions out there, please feel free to chime in. I'm wondering, are these shifts, I mean, are they profitable? I mean, is there some metric showing that, they're successful, or some measure to say, hey, this improves XXX?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, money matters a lot. And yes, I think I would say historically, the gripe that people had with insurance was always that, people tend to change insurance. If they move, they change jobs and whatnot. So the insurance companies aren't really incentivized to think about your long-term health. They kind of think about your health, during the few years that you're with them. And hence that means they don't really care about, chronic conditions and, preventative healthcare such that they're preventing, delaying, let's say, some chronic condition you might have by 10 years, right? At that point, you're not even their customer anymore, their patient anymore. And I think a shift in that has really happened with, the Affordable Care Act and really people thinking about, hey, let's not just reimburse for the services that you go to, in which case then you're just incentivized to, as a doctor to do as much services as possible, as an insurance company to cover as little of that as possible. But instead, we should actually grade you on the holistic health of that patient, right? And that goes down to many, many dozens of different metrics, right? Everything from, specific to diabetes, like your A1C measures, to, hey, have you just even done an annual wellness visit? Like you should go see your doctor at least once a year. Like that's the kind of thing where nowadays insurance would just cover for free for you, right? And that's part of their mission to say like, hey, look, we're now being graded on how you are holistically health-wise every year. And so now we actually have some financial incentives as well. Like we'll either get bonus payments if we do well, or we literally get penalized if we don't do well. And so that's been a big shift in regulation to try to push these insurance and employers to think more holistically about their patients' healthcare.
Sure. And I want to just mention this because we're in Los Angeles. As somebody told me the other day, this is a city that's long been known as a place of experimentation, healing practices. They said there's been sort of a Goop effect in recent years, and the companies have been attracted to this place, and they always have been, but they've seen a lot more people coming in here as we have more sort of genetic testing and sort of technology forward, super scalable ideas. They've been coming to Los Angeles because people here, it's a good sort of testing ground. People here have a lot of money. People here love to look beautiful and be healthy, and it's given rise to this sort of quote unquote Goop effect. And I'm curious. Well, Dr. Jonathan Leary, I mean, some would argue that that's exactly what you have, right? Your service. So maybe you want to start off and just talk a little bit about what you've seen in this LA market. I don't know if you came here, you've always been here, or how this may be different than other places.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up with just conventional medicine, nothing holistic. When I moved to LA and I heard people talk about energy or this Goop effect, I was like, these people are crazy. But it just gets down to the lack of education. When the fitness industry exploded, before that happened, people were like, why would I go to a gym? Why do I need to work out? And now it's in everyone's routine. because they're seeing the benefits. I think that what's happening in LA, which is the beautiful thing, is if we're the mecca of health or health and wellness industry, people now are following along. Just like I was saying before with these social media platforms, when I do a talk in New York or in Europe or through the Middle East, everyone has their like health gurus that they've been following or listen to their podcast or whatever channel they're on, and they're more aware because they're able to follow along. So although it's just happening in LA, everyone in the world can watch what's happening in LA, and the trends are all starting here and then eventually evolving across the world.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. I think something that's kind of interesting is, you know, we're also kind of seeing there's wave the type of care and how people get things done. So, you know, kind of talking about the LA scene, I think for a while you look at even our clients and their claims across the board, and you know, for a while it was glamorized almost like Xanax and people taking Adderall and Botox and things like that. And now you're kind of seeing a shift to these natural remedies of it, of like, oh, I don't, you know, have to take anything to sleep anymore. I do my mindfulness app at night, or I don't do Botox. I do these natural massages and acupuncture, facial acupuncture and things like that. So I think there's also different forms of people trying to find natural remedies and ways to do things while also balancing out kind of the more quick win, easy ways to do them based on just what was talked about at the time. So, you know, we do still see across our clients a lot of actually these seemingly healthy young people still spiking in claims from the standpoint of prescriptions that they're taking. And I think a lot of what these wellness centers and even celebrities are starting to do and talk about is natural remedies and really these holistic nutritionists that are talking about the benefits of exercise and meditation and natural remedies and all sorts of things like that too. So I think we will start to see, and I'm sure Dr. Leary, you see this as well, like people are coming to your clinic because they want to feel better in these kind of natural, innovative types of ways, as maybe opposed to some of the more superficial ways that people were appearing to be super fit and well in the past.
100%. I think people are starting to realize now, like, I think things have been, they started off very gimmicky, maybe the past 5 years of like, here's this quick fix,
Yeah,
little supplement. And now people are like, no, like this isn't sustainable and it's not fixing the root cause. And I think people want to have an answer to the root cause. But yeah, I definitely see that shifting.
I think you just see a lot. I mean, one of the best, I always tell, people ask, are there a lot of healthcare startups in LA? I think people think of San Francisco sort of as the mecca for startups in tech, or New York these days, et cetera. And I always say one of the greatest things about LA and when it comes to healthcare is that you really see the biggest variety of doctors and practitioners and providers, and catering to a population that's enormous and also highly diverse, right? And I think you just see a ton of experimentation side on the provider end. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, that's, patients do ultimately tend to listen to their doctors, to their guides, to their practitioners. And I think a lot of it for me is, how do we empower those providers, whether it's with capital, with tech, with with all of that, with better reimbursement models, et cetera, such that they would want to be entrepreneurs and try out new things versus, I think, hey, look, I guess I can go work for Kaiser or go work for Cedars or work for UCLA and get my salary, and that's sort of my life as a doctor, right? And I think that's frankly probably shifted the most in places like LA, where people feel like they can go out and do their own thing and also have sort of a platform and the marketing to go spread that. And I think you're only going to see more of that kind of experimentation from the practitioners and doctors themselves. And that I think is to me, that's the most important thing. I think it will not benefit patients or really anyone if healthcare only gets more and more concentrated into sort of the really big brands that about out there. That's not competitive, and it's bad overall for everyone.
Are there companies out there that you really think we should watch that are on the rise?
I mean, people have already mentioned a ton of companies. I think I tend to bucket them broadly into, more on the medical side, such that you can actually have both MD as well as non-MDs practitioners. And those are, think of them as the basically the modern day provider groups, right? So whether that's like a One Medical or a Privia or, new ones like Wellvana, et cetera, there's that version of it. And then there's sort of some of these, more from the accessibility tech angles, that we talked about, whether it's mental or physical health, right? That providing access to these therapies and services. And there's a whole host of them from, purely just an app like Calm to something like Lyra, which, sells into large employers and gives them all aspects of mental health and everything in between, basically.
Here's a question here. So from ER, he or she said, sorry, I shouldn't be presumptive. Meditation became highly popularized in the last 10 years with Calm and Headspace. What do you see as a sort of next trend in mental health and wellness that will gain widespread adoption? I don't know who wants to take that.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say very quickly. Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Or I'll start. I think it's the sense of community and human interaction, being around people. I mean, even simple things like hugging someone drops someone's cortisol levels. People need to feel like they're not alone. And I think that also comes into self-care of just something in your regimen, or whether it's a once a week or once a month thing that just takes care of yourself. At the end of the day, making sure that your health is your number one asset, and if community and not being alone, as well as doing some extra things that will take care of your body but also offset the stress you put on your body, I think that's extremely important.
I kind of bucket it into either the very health condition specific sort of very medical side of things versus how to improve accessibility and format. So on the first part, instead of just broad mental health services for light to moderate depression or anxiety, you're starting to see people focused on things like addiction, on things like psychiatric disorders, and really how do you build out from therapy to psychiatry to medication assisted treatment to inpatient and outpatient for that specific very challenging condition, right? So like, for example, we have a company called Path in LA that's only focused on addiction, and how do you string together different levels of addiction specialists so that really when a patient has that need, they can get holistic care across the board. And I think on the other side is kind of what I referred to earlier. I think some of these new formats, especially around group therapy, I find really interesting. There are companies, for example, there's a company called Coa Health, COA, and they're really trying to make a lot of these group therapies accessible and online, and also talk about various things, whether it's work related to relationship related to whatever, childcare, et cetera, as opposed to like, hey, we are a group mental health therapy if you have depression. And so I think there's that version as well as things like other accessibility company, for example, called Marigold Health, and really there's a bunch of these that are trying to take sort of that traditional AA social model and try to make that also accessible just online with groups as well. And obviously you should also go in person. That has a lot of additional benefits too. So that's kind of how I bucket the two categories.
Kalina, did you want to? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to add one more thing. I mean, you both touched on this a lot. I think I had two immediate thoughts when this came up. So the first is that I think in general, we're just going to see a rebrand of the wellness industry and relabeling of what a lot of this looks like. I don't think that necessarily mental health providers might identify as just mental health. Like they're really trying to solve for this whole array of what emotions people are going through. And I think that has stigmatized the space in that a lot of people won't sign up for their company's mental health offering because it feels just so heavy and might be something that they don't identify with. And I think we'll start to see this rebrand, and you already see it in words like coaching or life advice, or what can I help you with even, and the entry point to which people will start to access these services will just be indicating what their current issue, problem, thing they need help with is, and triage them to almost hidden services within that. So I think a lot of what we're seeing is these concierge service and almost advocacy services really pop up that have these vendors partnered behind them. So people don't know that they're necessarily going to a mental health vendor or financial vendor or whatnot. They're just triaged to the next person to help them. And that's a specialist within one of those networks. If that
there's a way to sort of destigmatize.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, if someone told you needed to go to a psychiatrist, that would feel very different when it said, hey, why don't you just talk to our, support expert that we have and they'll get you the right care. People are more prone to go to that sort of sort of model. So I think there'll be a big relabeling and kind of rebranding of how we talk about things like mental health and that. The second, and this is a little bit more immediate, but I think in terms of like the trend in mental health itself is I really, and hopefully this doesn't sound too negative, but I think we're going to see a huge increase in just trauma and coping in general. I think right now a lot of us are kind of hanging in there. A lot of people are talking about seeing coworkers and friends and family just hitting breaking points, and I think the next 6 months to a year is going to be a big year of coping for a lot of people. And so I think that looking at offerings that aren't necessarily just like the fun headspace lively interactions and cartoons and things that you watch, it's really going to be some heavy stuff that's coming down the line and making sure people have the right access to that to cope with death and isolation and just some really heavy topics that are hitting the masses right now.
Okay, so I think we have one more question, and if we could just take that really quickly, because we do have something a little special at the end that I'd like to give the audience. Just a quick question for Dr. Leary. I think it was just a piece of advice, and I don't know if this is exactly the form, but somebody asked whether they're from a prospective chiropractor student, to go, whether this person should go the traditional route, or can we still make as much of an impact on wellness as Remedy Place without becoming a chiropractor or a doctor?
100%. I think this is a loaded question. I was actually interviewed by Vice last year, and their question is, what is this next wave of wellness? And is like, why are people looking more towards their yoga instructor than their doctor? And I think it comes back to that time that you can interact with somebody. I think the average patient-doctor interaction is 5 to 8 minutes. So there's only so much connection that can happen in that moment. I think that anyone that is just trying to do good and trying to help an individual, you don't have to be a doctor or a chiropractor in order to accomplish that. I mean, a lot of my patients that come to me, they're like, my personal trainer is almost my therapist, and having that session every morning makes me feel good. And if that makes them feel good and that offsets their day, that's really powerful. If a nutritionist is spending time to go through your whole entire diet and then all of a sudden your symptoms are going away from whatever condition you have, it's also extremely powerful. Yeah. I could go on for days and days. I don't know how much time we have left, but
well, we're running near the end, and like I said, we do have a little bit of a special treat. So I just wanted to get everyone's parting thoughts. Maybe we can you guys can just jump in on the wellness industry, where we're going, et cetera, or just some parting thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to start it off. I think, and I, without knowing exactly who all the participants are on the call and speaking on the corporate side, I mean, I think for anyone who is in a space of leadership or looking for solutions for their own company and employers, a big thing to think about is that healthcare and wellness in general is really becoming more and more individualized, and kind of just trying to make an assumption of what works for the masses. It just is not going to cut it anymore, especially now that we're all in our home offices and dealing with different things. So our biggest, piece of feedback and my takeaway is just really turning toward your own people and those around you for feedback. I think this is really going to be important to listen to what are people needing, what's their individual circumstance, and kind of trying to take that in turn and find, what are going to be the best solutions, because we're in a very unique time where employers have lost a little control they get with the workplace, and finding a way to meet the individual needs and services is going to be really important.
Kevin?
Yeah, I think I'll maybe refer to something I mentioned earlier, which is really, I think, maybe especially during this time period when, a lot of outpatient care has almost gone to zero because of COVID, and people are, not really utilizing medical services, et cetera. I think it is really a moment where a lot of the healthcare providers or healthcare providers in training, right? Like to the question that was asked of Dr. Leary, a lot of those students and practitioners are having, questions for the first time, really, of like, is this the thing that I want to do? Is my business as usual going to come back? Like, what do I do with all this medical training? And I would actually encourage people to look into, again, this is the time point now where patients are more and more directly seeking out the right type of care for themselves. And if there's something that you're really passionate about, a specialty of your medicine area, whatever it is, maybe use this time to experiment a little bit and figure out if there are ways for you to directly work with patients as opposed to, the traditional way of going through the intermediaries of large hospitals and insurances and things like that.
Dr.
Yeah,
Leary?
yeah, just to top it off, I do think that the next biggest thing to hit the health and wellness industry is alternative medicine and some type of preventative self-care. I've just seen the huge rise of, this transition, and people are asking more and more questions than ever. And at the end of the day, people want to feel good and not be in pain. And they're looking to not have a surgery or a drug as the first line of intervention, which is leading to the explosion of the industry that I'm in.
And to that point, what we're going to do is we're going to have a sound bath, and maybe Dr. Leary, you can talk to us a little bit about what a sound bath is and what its benefits are.
Yeah, sound baths are really interesting. Once again, when I first heard of them, I was like, why would I listen to a sound bath? However, it's quite fascinating, the effects of sound, specifically sound frequencies. A lot of new medical devices are now actually using frequencies as certain therapies. This is an ancient practice of delivering this music by, using these bowls to basically put off a certain frequency. Every single cell in the body functions at a specific frequency. So there's different frequencies that will heal certain tissues. A lot of the research really is just actually lowering heart rate, the calming effects, lowering cortisol levels. But when you sit through a sound bath and you finish, you do feel a lot more calm. And like I said, in a stressful time, anything that's going to help calm us down is extremely beneficial.
So in these stressful times, here's hoping to that everybody relaxes a bit. This is from Susie Marco Shefflin. I hope I'm saying her name correctly, of the Copper Vessel. She's a LA-based sound healer, Reiki master, Kundalini yoga teacher, and sobriety coach. And she's been pretty vocal about her path to sobriety and her journey. So she's going to be leading this crystal alchemy sound bath ceremony. Here you go. Let's